Hey everyone, I'm here with Matt Colwell. Matt is the senior pastor at Knox Presbyterian Church in Pasadena, California. Matt, welcome. How are you doing?
Hanging in there, Marcus. It's a day-to-day journey, but yeah, hanging in there.
Yeah, hanging in there because, and I'll just kind of set up our conversation. You lost your home in the fire in Altadena, the Eaton Fire, recently, and so anyway, I guess I just want to say up front, um, I've been praying for all of you, and I know many have, and I cannot imagine the kind of loss that's involved in that. I haven't been up to the area since the fires, and I have a hard time imagining what I would see and maybe will see if and hopefully when I do make that trip. Our church has been in talks with an organization actually that Todd Bolsinger referred me to hopefully send teams up, as necessary, just to help with the fire recovery. And so,
that's great.
We'll see. We'll see. Eventually, I anticipate seeing what it is that you experienced. So, we're going to talk about that today. I also just want to mention that you and I first met 8-9 years ago, something like that. I think it was 2016 at Credo, which is, how would you describe Credo for people who don't know what Credo is?
Yeah, it's like a gathering for pastors, I think, in either mid or late career, though they may have an early one, and it's an opportunity to kind of look at different aspects of your life. I think we looked at financial life and worship life and family life and did some goal setting and did all of that with sort of coaches and folks who had expertise in different arenas, and then also had a lot of time to kind of process life and ministry and the path ahead with other people. Some, almost all of whom I think were new to me, including you, and it was wonderful to get to meet you there.
Yeah, it was a really great experience. And speaking of difficult experiences like you're going through, that Credo, I probably mentioned it to you at the time. You probably don't remember. It happened for me the week after I had gotten voted out of my church, so
I do remember that.
Yeah, it was. It felt providential that I was there that week because after a year of some really toxic things and then getting voted out, and then the very next day I was on a plane to Little Rock, Arkansas for Credo. And I was like, Lord, that had been on my calendar for 6 months already. I was like, Lord, you knew I was going to need that this week. And so it is amazing how God provides in surprising ways.
And was it a helpful space to process that in some ways? I remember just having a number of people in various places of ministry where there were either crises or just other issues, and lots of sharing around that.
Yeah, it was a very healing, healthy place for me that week. And in fact, there was another pastor who had gotten voted out of her church that very same Sunday that I had. And so it was like, okay, we're going to commiserate together. And
church ministry is a piece of cake, isn't it? That's, I think, the real lesson of Credo that we all came away with.
Yeah. Anyway, I was really glad to be there, really glad to meet you, and really glad to connect here again as well. So, Matt, tell us the story from your perspective, how everything unfolded in regard to the fires in LA.
Sure. We had heard about the Palisades fire, and we also, throughout LA County, and certainly where I live in Altadena, which is a community just north of Pasadena, part of unincorporated Los Angeles, and it's closer to the San Gabriel Mountains than Pasadena, but where we live, at least, there's still a good distance, mile more, of homes between us and the mountains. But we'd heard reports of the windstorms, and there were blackouts that were happening to avoid the potential of electrical fire. On January 7th, when Palisades Fire was already burning, but that's a good distance away from the Pasadena, Altadena area. My wife and daughter were at the house that evening. I was out having dinner with a friend of mine close in Pasadena, and around 6:15, 6:30, when I was getting set to leave and head back home and check on Jill and Lucy, I got a call from my daughter, Lucy, who's 20 years old, that they had just evacuated the house. We hadn't gotten an evacuation warning, but then it was in blackout mode, so it would have been tricky to get that. And she said the fire's very close to the house. They grabbed the dog and just left. So when I talked to them on the phone, we made the decision, hey, let's meet at Knox Presbyterian Church, the church where I serve, which is in Pasadena, south of Altadena. They and I met here. We decided that Jill and I, my wife Jill and I, would head back up north to Altadena to try to see if we could recover a few items, computers, glasses, that kind of thing. And it was a little eerie heading up Hill Avenue towards the fire when everyone else was coming away from it. And we could even see, as we were going north on Hill over to the northeast of us, the fire burning up over Eaton Canyon. But we thought, all right, if we need to turn around, we will. Felt like we could make it safely to the house, grab a few things really quickly, and then race back. So we did that, grabbed a few photo albums, a few vital documents. But other than that, figured, man, it would have to burn down thousands of houses for a fire to reach anywhere near where we were. So we did not think that there was a high risk of our house actually burning down. Then back down to the church, decided that Jill and Lucy would head down to San Diego, to your neck of the woods where I have family. I wanted to stay close to Knox in case we were needed to be an evacuation site or to have some, if Knox should have to be evacuated, if there were needs that connected to this campus, I wanted to be there. And so Jill and Lucy went down to San Diego, spent the night at a friend's house the first night, and then the next morning we heard from our neighbor that our entire neighborhood, save one house, so this is about 16 to 18 houses on this one street ending in a cul-de-sac, had burned down.
Wow. How does one house survive? Just out of curiosity.
It's an interesting question. And I will say, if you get the chance to visit Altadena right now, the burn sites, it's overwhelming. You feel like you're like stepping into some apocalyptic film, or that it looks almost like a bomb or several bombs have dropped on this whole region. But there is also a sense to which, the Fox's, this restaurant a block away from where our house is, independent, really neat place, burned down, and the Jack in the Box right across the street didn't. Driving up Altadena Avenue, the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center, where Jill and I had visited Yom Kippur services or attended at the invitation of the rabbi, that completely burned down. And on the left, Callisto Tea House, still standing. It's really interesting that with the high winds and the path of the fire, which houses got taken out and which did not. What did, I think the reason the one house that survived made it is it was on the northeast section, and it was one story and a little bit separated from the other houses, where so many of other houses were these Tudor wood 1920s houses, so close together that the fire just sent everything up in flame almost together.
Wow. Amazing. Reminds me a little bit of a friend of mine that I was at Fuller with 20 plus years ago, and he lives in Altadena, lived in an apartment, and he posted a video of going back to where his apartment building was, and they found a turtle in the basement, and it was the turtle that had lived in the koi pond in there. And he's like, look who we found. And amazing, that little bit of survival there, Yeah. So how did you feel? Like, what did you go through emotionally and mentally as you just realized what had happened?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, as a pastor yourself, this is all happening. So I'm fearing for my own house or following the fire in Altadena at the same time that I'm calling church members that I know are in either the Altadena area or, and even those in Pacific Palisades whose houses I knew could be at risk. So I'm texting, calling, connecting with our deacons around that at the same time that I'm kind of keeping an eye on my own house. So
Hmm.
initially there was relief when I heard particular members, oh, the fire didn't get them, and then
Hmm.
this real deep initially just shock that our house had burned down, and at first not beginning to be able to contemplate in my head or heart kind of all that would mean.
Yeah.
In some sense, it was this strange. I mean, I'm sitting right where I was when I heard the news.
Mm.
Everything around me right now is just as it was. It was like
Yeah.
my office, the church
Yeah.
campus, nothing here has changed, and yet suddenly I don't have a home to go back to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think that since that time, it's like the heart and head, you just can't process that degree
Yeah.
of that kind of a loss all at once. But then there'll be little things that hit you. A few days later, we were walking down. We were into Costco, which on one sense was, oh, familiar. I know this. This
Yeah.
is almost,
Yeah.
it's nice to be in familiar territory when you've lost your
Right.
home. But then as we walked down the tool aisle, I suddenly it like
Mm.
hit me all these
Mm.
tools that had connections from back when I worked as an auto mechanic to
Mm.
friends and relationships to fixing the car in my driveway, and
Mm.
just thinking of all of that
Yeah.
gone. I right there, it's like, oh, this is when it just hits emotionally, and was there
Yeah.
crying in the middle of a Costco tool aisle.
Mm. Yeah.
And there have been other times like that where
Yeah.
something will, I'll kind of get my heart around one aspect of the loss, and then it'll hit.
Mm. Do you do you see other people breaking down in ways as you're going around town? I'm just curious. Like, I would imagine there's a fair amount of that happening. Uh,
Yeah, I talked. It certainly it's been a real gift to be able to go through an experience like this, to really not feel alone. And I would say
yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
first of all, I've got a wonderful wife and partner who's going through this experience herself, and
Yeah.
there is a gift to both going through it, and then things will hit
Yeah.
us at different times. But then even
Yeah.
just connecting with congregation members. On one hand,
Yeah.
there's a sense that I'm reaching out to them and seeking to
Yeah.
support them and pray for them and offer pastoral
Yeah.
and other kinds of tangible support. But it's
Yeah.
also been this opportunity to share together. Hey,
Yeah.
what sparked this? For someone
Yeah.
it was a handbag. For someone else, it was
Mm.
a violin and a musical loss. Another, it was a mandolin. Another, it
Mm.
was remembering photos that
Mm.
will be lost. For another, it was realizing how this impacts their kids, and
Yeah.
that different things will set it off for
Yeah.
different people.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads then to the question of how, as a pastor, how are you navigating this? Because you're a pastor who has lost his home, pastoring people in your congregation who have lost their homes, and how do you do that?
Yeah, it on one hand, it's really not ideal to also have lost your home when you're trying to pastor people, just
Right.
because there's a myriad of insurance claims, of
Mm.
FEMA
Mm.
applications, of logistics around just getting clothes that
Yeah.
or that can be quite overwhelming, in addition to wanting to really care for and pastor folks who are also going through this incredibly challenging experience and sense of loss. So that, I think, on the time attention front, that piece has been really tough. But I would also say, going through it myself, there's a sense that I am experiencing this at the same time, and that
Yeah.
gives me an opportunity, or I don't know, a kind of an inroad to really being able to empathize with
Yeah.
what other people are going through.
Yeah.
You've had this experience as a pastor, I know, where we sit
Hmm.
with people who are just about to say farewell to a spouse. I haven't been
Right.
through that before. We sit with people who've lost a son or daughter, and I haven't been through that before. But at
Yeah.
least with regard to having your home and possessions burned down, I have been through that, and
Hmm.
that has, I think, given me some opportunity to empathize with and to be with others in our
Hmm.
congregation. We had a total of 8 families who lost their homes. That's not including a number of people who are still displaced from the smoke and ash that filled their homes so much that even though their homes are still standing, they still can't go back to
Oh.
them. And then we've got
Hmm.
everyone's got friends and family members, other members where their children's school burned down. And that they've had to navigate that impact. So it's certainly been a dominating force that
Yeah.
we've had to contend with.
Yeah. One of the things that I have wondered about, uh, especially as I was started thinking about you in leading up to this conversation here, um, did you preach that following Sunday after uh,
Yes.
you lost your home, and what was that like?
Yeah. So that was a big decision. Our house burned down on a
Hmm.
Wednesday and had to decide would I try to preach that Sunday or not. And I
Hmm.
will say that I have relied a lot the last 2 months on some of our church's in-house preachers, guest preachers I know.
Hmm.
That has been a great gift, and I've really needed the
Mm.
help. But the
Good.
Sunday right after, so partly I felt like it was important that I preached that Sunday, but there was also a sense to which, one of the gifts of being a pastor, one of the things that I really find meaningful to do is to listen with a community for what
Mm.
God might be saying to us
Hmm.
at a particular point in time in history. And I'm served by that myself because I get
Yeah.
to go to the scriptures and listen. God, what might you be saying to us
Uh-huh. Yeah.
in this passage and at this time? And then I get to pass on what I hope will be the fruit of that discernment in conversation with a congregation. And so there was a big part of me that, much as I didn't have the time because I was trying to do thousands of other things on the recovery mode, my
Hmm.
heart very much wanted to be engaged in that task. And I would say it was healing and hopeful. And what I do think came away, I didn't have as much time to prepare the sermon,
Sure.
but I could talk about, hey, thank you, Carolyn and Patrick, for giving me a
Yeah.
place to stay the last 4 days.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah. Yeah.
Spencer, who I remember having in my confirmation class. Thanks for loaning me this shirt and my shoes. And thank
Yeah.
you, Joy and Marcus, this couple from our church, showed up the day my house burned down.
Mm.
And they said, you know what? You probably need like clothing. You probably need just
Mhm.
some basics, and you need soap and you need shampoo. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I do.
Mm.
I really need that stuff. My wife and daughter are down in San Diego. So they go to Target and they
Mm.
get all that stuff, or get a bunch
Mm.
of it and bring it back to me. And I realized the next morning, had they not done it, I wouldn't have had socks. I wouldn't have had
Wow.
underwear. I wouldn't have had
Wow.
all this other stuff. So thankfully, there were people who jumped in, and then there could really be this sense on Sunday of a community sharing
Mhm.
with each other. And then
Yeah.
lots of other, like there were people in our church that opened their home to people in our church who lost homes or were
Yeah.
displaced, and other
Yeah.
people are already trying to offer goods. And it was really something to feel like I was a part of it and a recipient.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of amazing or important, I think, right? You as a recipient, because so often pastors, we we think of ourselves as the givers, right? And our congregations are the recipients. But we also have to be recipients too. Sometimes, maybe all the time, in one way or another. Um, and yeah, to be. I mean, we are trained to be givers of compassion, and then sometimes we find ourselves having to receive that compassion. I think that's powerful and beautiful. And I think just having been through my own difficult experiences, which I touched on at the beginning of our conversation, but not as intense as yours, I think, in the end. It is those experiences that help us, where we have to be receivers of compassion, and I think in a lot of ways also trusting in God and God's provision, and it expands our compassion for others. At least it did for me.
Yeah.
How has this shaped your congregation, since this happened?
Yeah, it has certainly. It's presented a focus to our work as a congregation we weren't
Mm.
anticipating in several ways.
Mm.
So on
Mm-hmm.
one hand, it has presented to all of us this task, this opportunity, this sense of call that, oh wow, we've now really got to care for one another, because a
Yeah.
host of our number are really need help and support.
Mm.
It also directed us outward, because, like, we're a congregation that has been very long, has long had a deep heart for immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers,
Mm.
and there was an immediate
Mm.
concern of, all right, how do we support people who might not have been homeowners, who might have been in this
Mm-hmm.
journey, and we have several in our congregation in this situation where they're trying to seek citizenship, and they're in transitional sort of states, and in many ways it makes them especially vulnerable
Yeah.
to the impact of something like this, like the fire. And so thinking about,
Yeah.
okay, how do we care for them? And then there's
Mm.
the other piece that we had not anticipated, where financial gifts and have come in from all over the country
Mm-hmm.
to support fire relief efforts. And many people have wanted to do that through a church
Mm.
context, through a local church that they know and trust or have heard about, or want to support those in our congregation who've lost. And so there's been this really important work of receiving that with
Mm-hmm.
gratitude to God and deep thanks for all those who felt called to give in that way, but then to also really set up well how that might be distributed, both to aid those who've lost homes, but then also to support the larger kind of relief, recovery, and ultimately rebuilding efforts that lie ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, One of the things that you and I talked about before we started recording was, and in the days leading up, was the importance of adaptive capacity. So Church Leadership Institute, we focus on leading change, adaptive leadership, and most of the time in our relatively safe first world context, that just means, the neighborhood is different than it used to be. So how do we adapt to the new neighborhood? It's younger, or it's older, or it's less, this ethnicity or that ethnicity, and so how do we adapt? Sometimes change is thrust upon us, as it has been in your case, in ways that are, it seems like they would be harder, more than we can bear. Like when I think about what you're going through, I'm like, I don't know how I would get through that. And yet somehow you got to get through it, right? And I imagine that's kind of where you're at. Like, somehow you're getting through it. And so how would you describe having to lead adaptively in this situation of having change thrust upon you? How do you have that capacity, right? How do you develop that capacity?
Well, first of all, I will say I've really enjoyed this podcast, and our church has been blessed to have Todd Bolsinger really work with us on both our session leadership and broader congregation on this whole notion of building adaptive capacity. And I've thought of that often. I thought of that the day it occurred, because of this whole framework of recognizing that there's a whole lot that's changing and that you can't control. So trying to, within that, hone in on what's your DNA, what's the most important, what is kind of anchoring you, what's your mission, and then hold on to that as you adapt to a changing world, a changing reality. in the midst of that. And I've thought of that often because it's been an
Mm.
hourly. The need to adapt has changed every hour, just about
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
midst of the fires. And so it really has been trying to think, okay, what's crucial to this congregation's kind of mission and DNA, and certainly caring for each other, attending to God in the midst of it, being mindful of the most vulnerable, all of those things we can hang on to. Prayer, worship, all are really important stuff. And what we do the next hour may need to change.
Mm.
One thing I would say that has been extremely helpful is all these support networks, that we spend so much time building about, and we hear, oh, it's important to do this, like form a group of local pastors who you can do life sharing
Mm.
with on a monthly basis, and who you can connect with just sort of for your own sanity and support. That, lo and behold, when your house burns down, it's really helpful
Yeah.
to have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
These other structures in the church of sharing leadership and having others filling important roles is super helpful
Mhm.
when your house burns down. And I also thought too, I remember reading a New York Times article sometime back that looked at endurance athletes, and the title of the article was "You're Stronger Than You Think You Are." And it
Hmm.
was this notion that what endurance athletes often tell people who will never try to run 36, 50 miles in one go, or do these, sail across the ocean, or do
Mhm.
these other things that, say, triathletes or others will, or these folks who say do solo ventures across the ocean will
Yeah.
try to do. That in fact, our capacity to adapt is much larger than we think it
Mm.
is.
Hmm.
And when you're in the midst of this challenge to do it, hang on to those practices that are really crucial. For
Yeah.
me, what I tried to hang on to is, all right, I'm going to at least pray in the morning. I'm going to try and get
Mm.
exercise at least 4 days a week. I'm going to walk the dog, and everything else may have to go for this season. But I'll at least do those things, and then I'll try to have the strength I can to tackle other things.
Yeah, that's good. I was just writing down as you're speaking, kind of there were three things that I heard you say: friends, or like a circle of people. Todd, I think, talks about mentor. If I can remember, there's three kinds of relationships: friends, mentors, and partners. I think, and they kind of
Yeah.
fill different needs in different ways, um, but friends in this case sound so important. Just people to walk with through a really difficult time.
Although, to
Um,
jump on that, I
yeah,
love Todd's framework with that. I will also
yeah,
say mentors. I have a
yeah.
spiritual director who I meet with
Good.
monthly, and it was so great to know I could talk with him. I've got a kind of a ministry coach, a person who offers me ministry discernment work. He was
Yeah,
there. I've got some
good.
older pastors who I know from Monte Vista Grove. It was wonderful to have
Mm,
them. So the mentor piece was absolutely helpful. And then and the colleagues, the sense that
yeah,
there were other people both on our staff. We have a great staff, and having and I would say our session deacons, people who really could share in the work.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yes, man, all of those are critical for these times, and this is such a good reminder that we need to be developing those relationships before the crisis
Yeah.
happens, right? So that when it happens, and there will be something, right, for everybody in one way or another, we're going to need those relationships. You also mentioned just recognizing that you have more capacity than you think. I love that. And I think you're right. I think, but we don't know until it happens, right? And then we do. And then the other thing you mentioned was practices. Say maybe just a little bit more about why practices matter for developing that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when particularly, uh, it's great to have like a spiritual discipline that really works, or it was very
Hmm.
helpful for me to have a spiritual discipline that worked for me, so that when everything else, my home base was suddenly burned down.
Hmm.
My so much of the tasks I do during the day had to be very different, at least a certain percentage of them, because there's so much to navigate related to the fire specifically, that it was really great to just jump in to at least one thing that was familiar, which is dang,
Yeah.
like I use in my denomination, you probably know, there's the Presbyterian Daily Prayer app. I've tried a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of different prayer formats. I really
Uh-huh.
like that one. I also do a
Yeah.
brief time of centering prayer, those two, and I'm like, okay, I've at least
Good. Yeah.
got
Good.
something that's familiar and I know is kind of reliable for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I can tackle a whole lot that isn't, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. That's super helpful. Um, so, so now, the crisis has happened. You're still in it. I mean, but the fires are over. I mean, I think have they been contained completely? They're completely out, or are
Yeah.
there
So
still? Okay.
the Eaton Fire, at least, which was the one that burned down our house, started
Yeah.
January 7th and officially went out 24 days later. Was
24 days later.
finally
That's a
fully
long.
contained.
That's a long time though. That's pretty wild. So, okay. So let me just ask kind of two more questions. The first one is just kind of what's next? Like, where do
Mhm.
you go from here? Personally, you and your family, and then also as a church.
Yeah. So personally, we are right now living at a nearby senior living community, a retirement center,
Mm,
Monte Vista Grove Homes. It's a spot that was originally created and has traditionally been a retirement place for church workers, missionaries, or pastors. Now it serves an even broader community, but they were lovely to open their doors. So they've been preparing a place for us, putting us in a temporary dwelling or apartment for the immediate future. And now, just on Monday, we moved into an apartment we can stay at for
mm,
a number of months yet to come.
good.
And so that's great to kind of have an apartment that we can live in now. And
Yeah.
we are looking already at rebuilding. I'm hosting a meeting of our neighbors here at Knox in 2 weeks,
Mm,
and we're going to be talking about, hey, do we want to try to have a common architect, or how can we help each other? Because we've been
mm,
texting and emailing and connecting with each other, feeling like, man, our whole neighborhood is in this together, and we want to
yeah.
love our neighbor in the midst of it,
Yeah.
and also try to do this in a coordinated and community fashion. And
Yeah.
yet again, it helped that we would often have potlucks, and even during
Mm,
COVID, we
mm,
would have kind of times where we'd gather out in the middle
mm,
of our street to have drinks and sing and catch
mm.
up. That all of that work of community building we can now draw on. So
Yeah.
that's personally. And then on
Yeah.
the church front, certainly there's a lot of a work ahead, recognizing the rebuilding is going to take 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
It's sort
Yeah.
of the conservative estimates we're getting. So we're really trying to prepare for the long haul. We're trying to this whole piece. We have a team at our church that is called our sustainability team. Focuses in on watershed discipleship, kind of
Mm,
ecological justice and environmental care stuff. And there's absolutely a recognition that, I'm in some ways a climate refugee. I am
mm,
impacted
hmm.
on one hand because of a bad few set of circumstances, but that are also linked to broader impacts of climate change.
Right.
So trying to think together, how can we make a difference in that, and already have some
Mm,
plans ahead on that front.
hmm.
There's there'll be the ongoing desire to support those who've suffered loss, not just for the immediate future, but for that
Yeah.
3 to 5 year period of time. And then there's the issue of, that Pasadena's already struggled with homelessness.
Hmm.
How is
Mm,
this now going to impact? We just did a homeless count last week, and we'll get a better sense of how
mm.
the numbers of homeless have been impacted. I suspect they've gone way up, and at least
Yeah.
the areas that some Knox folks who participated in the count checked out have certainly
Yeah.
almost doubled what they've been in previous
Yeah.
years. So
Yeah. Yeah.
already thinking about how do we respond to that.
Yeah. Is there enough housing to go around right now for everyone who's lost their homes? How's that?
Absolutely not. So
Yeah.
what's really interesting is you've got this situation where not only have more than looks like the latest numbers, more than 6,000 people have lost their homes in just
Yeah.
Altadena, but then you've got a host of other homes where people are still displaced.
Hmm.
So all those folks, and in a situation, it's often said of Southern California that we had a housing crisis already, and this kind
Hmm.
of pushed it off a cliff.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the notion too, particularly of trying to get hold of affordable housing, is
Yeah.
just made all that much harder when
Yeah.
so many people are trying to get housing in the same
Yeah.
region.
The challenges just keep piling up in a way, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. It looked like you're gonna.
Oh, I was just going to say, but it there in the midst of all that, I
Uh-huh.
do want to say how powerful it's been for all of us to at least who've been a part of Knox, and I know
Yeah.
of other local churches like Grace. Best friend of mine from back in seminary days went on to
Hmm.
be is now an associate minister at Pacific Palisades Presbyterian
Okay.
Church. They lost their
Oh.
church campus,
Yeah. Yeah.
and every house, building, school around that campus is gone, just burned
Wow.
down. And thinking, we had lunch the other day and she's talking about that experience, but her home survived. My home and possessions
Mm.
did not, but our church campus was
Yeah.
largely not impacted by
Mm-hmm.
the fires, at least didn't have to be shut down. And just
Mm-hmm.
this sense both of us have experienced of people reaching out from, we don't necessarily anticipate that continuing, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the efforts so far have been really moving.
Yeah. Wow. Um, Here's my last question, and then I'll give you one last little thing just to share how folks can help out if necessary, but or if possible. But for other pastors and leaders who are going through some kind of difficult situation, what encouragement or what words would you offer to them in the midst of whatever they're going through?
Yeah, that I would, speaking personally of this
Mm-hmm.
particular time, I've been at Knox for 18 years. So I've been in this
Mm-hmm.
particular church position serving in that way. And certainly the last month and a half have felt God filled, have felt extremely meaningful, like the work um, really was of significance. And
Mm.
so for other pastors who are going through really difficult periods of time, it could be that there's also an opportunity in that to minister to people and or to find and lean on the presence of God. And even personally,
Yeah.
there's nothing like losing your house and possessions to really force you to rethink what does it mean to really say I have a home with God, or to believe that I have
Yeah.
a foundation and source of stability in my relationship with God, and then to lean on that. So
Yeah.
that has certainly been an invitation I wouldn't wish on anybody, but that can come from a really difficult time. And then to think of it as ways that God may be forming me to better minister to and care for people who are going through really hard
Yeah.
times, and the
Yeah.
specific circumstance of loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a good word. Matt, thank you for sharing your story today. And thank you for sharing, your experience as a pastor and leading a congregation of people who are suffering right now. You're suffering and they're suffering, and your whole community is suffering, and you're doing the work, right? And you're leading through it, and it's a gift to see that you're doing it, and I know it's a gift to your people as well. So, thank you for sharing that with us today. I didn't warn you I was going to ask this, but if maybe off the top of your head, if people wanted to help out, if there was anything that they could do, is there some way that they can engage in order to help?
Yeah, that's a very kind question. Certainly, here are ways people I think have been helping out, all of which I think have a big impact.
Hmm.
Is if they're really interested in giving to sort of broader relief efforts in the greater LA region that are church based. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. They've been working closely with me, and I really respect the work they do. If they've got a heart for a particular local church, synagogue, or other house of faith, giving to those is lovely. If they've got a real heart and are coming from a Christian faith perspective on, say, the sort of climate change issue, Creation Justice Ministries is one group that I've really been impressed with, and we've worked closely with. And then, I think if they're also willing, if people would like to help out, sort of hang in there, because it's going to be a long haul. And I think we'll even have a better sense of what some of the needs will be in time. That's why a lot of the financial gifts that have been given, some have already been distributed. Some we're really looking at, all right, how can we use this most strategically to impact when the going's really going to get tough. I've often heard it said some 3 to 4 months after a disaster, you've passed what's called the honeymoon phase, where everyone is really kind of interested. The focus is there. There's a real great sense of support. And I now know firsthand what they mean. But then there comes this other phase after that where, I wonder if people are still remembering about this. And actually, suddenly things are getting really hard and not easier, where those can be really important times for ministry, for outreach and connection and support.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. It's going to be a long, long recovery, and I'm sure there will be years worth of opportunities to continue to serve and rebuild.
Like people even ask about sending teams, and I can absolutely imagine opportunities for that, and we're kind of keeping our eyes and ears open to what specific options there may be.
Yeah. And I'll just point people to, Todd referred me to the On Mission Network, and they're, so I've been working with them for our church in terms of soon. It's amazing how long it takes, but we haven't been able to actually, they're not ready to send anyone yet. I guess there's a lot that happens in the aftermath of a fire, but soon we hope to go. So people can also maybe check with the On Mission Network in terms of how they can get involved. So anyway, Matt, thank you. Our prayers are with you, with your congregation, with the city of Pasadena and Altadena and LA. And so thank you for continuing to do the work. Thank you.